All right, I've been avoiding this subject, but it's time to talk about the Canon R5, R6, and the Sony A7S3. If you're new here, my name is Caleb, and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012. But this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. All right, before we start talking about the Canon R5 and the Canon R6 and the Sony A7S3, do you remember that little temporary YouTube studio I built in the unfinished part of our basement? Well, this is the corner where it was. And as you can tell, there's no longer a little studio right there because we've started working on the basement and we put in this window right over here, an egress window. So, like basically a fire escape for the bedroom that we're going to be putting down here. And so I'm going to be starting working on the rest of the basement with some help from, friends and family. But I'm going to be primarily doing the rest of this basement. But in the meantime, I had to take down that studio that was right here, and I'm actually gonna put one on the other side of the basement, just another temporary studio. It's just gonna be the concrete wall in the background. It might actually look kind of cool, I don't know. But as I set that studio up, let's talk about the Canon R5, the Canon R6, and the Sony A7S3 from a GH5 shooter perspective. I'll talk about maybe some of the specs, which you guys have seen like a ton of the specs, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. YouTube has been saturated with videos right now about the Canon R5, R6, and the Sony A7S3. I'll spend some time on like, who are these cameras for? And I don't know, is one of those cameras in my future? So this video is nothing fancy. I don't even have lights set up. I'm just using our basement lights. But we'll set up that little temporary studio. And while we're doing that, we'll talk about the Canon R5, Canon R6, and the Sony A7S3 from a GH5 shooter perspective. All right, so there's no denying that this summer has been awesome for filmmakers, for content creators, with the announcement of some of these amazing cameras like the Canon R5, R6, and Sony A7S3. But one of my favorite parts about these resolution wars or camera wars is actually a Twitter feed, and the Twitter feed is from Tommy Calloway. And if you know Tommy, he is a lights expert. So his channel is completely dedicated to lights and lighting. And Tommy's over here is putting out tweets like, your videos will still look like crap with a Sony A7S3 if you don't control the lighting. Or, you guys, a new camera comes out tomorrow. You know what that means? We're getting lit because you should just buy lights. So his Twitter feed has been some of the best throughout this whole thing, and I fully agree with him. And also one of his tweets gives a breakdown of, for the cost of a Sony A7S3, the types of lights and the lighting kit that you could get for that amount, and that's not even including the lens, just for the camera body of the A7S3. The lighting kit that you can get for that amount is just mind-blowing. But I guess that's my first thought to ponder. Do we actually need these cameras, or should we be investing in other things like lighting or audio, that type of thing? All right now let's talk about the Canon EOS R5 and just go over some of the specs. All right, so this thing is like decked out. I mean, this is a powerful camera. 45 megapixel full frame sensor. You have 8K 30 RAW and 4K 120 10-bit internal video. You have a 5-axis image stabilization, the dual pixel autofocus, which is just amazing. Multiple types of media that you can put in there. Now, a while back, my buddy Bobby and I made a video talking about, and this is like at the beginning of the R5 conversation, and we talked about what it means for maybe some GH5 shooters. And one of the things that Bobby said and that we chatted a little bit about was Canon somehow in some way is going to mess this camera up. And so what I've seen from some different videos on YouTube is that the issue seems to be the overheating. So I always feel like Canon puts out photography cameras that have some video features. And I was really hoping that the Canon R5 would be one of those hybrid cameras geared towards video shooters that you can use for photography. But I think once again, Canon proved that it's a photography camera with some amazing video features, but the overheating is gonna be an issue, especially for event videographers, you know, wedding videographers and people like that. So once again, I think Canon kind of missed the ball on the video side of things. Now let's talk about the 8K. That just blows me away. I wouldn't even know what to do with 8K. For most of my client work, I'm still delivering in 1080. So I don't know if I need 8K to punch in that much further when I can, you know, use 4K and punch in as far as I need to. People are gonna make amazing content with the R5. And the R6, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on, but it's just a smaller version and still has overheating issues. Now, if I got my hands on an R5 to try it out, man, I would jump at that opportunity. Everybody knows about Canon, you know, skin tones and Canon color, C-Log, all that stuff. I mean, there's a ton of videos on it, and having some of those options might be pretty amazing. But once again, I think Canon kind of missed the mark for video shooters. And not only that, the Canon R5 is coming in around $4,000 just for the body. But for that price point for video shooters, you might as well just go a little bit extra and go with the cinema line of Canon cameras. But the Canon R5 looks like an amazing camera, and a lot of people are gonna make some great content with it. All right, now let's talk about the Sony A7S III, and this is the one that really intrigues me because I believe that this one is geared more towards video shooters. So some of the specs which you probably already know: a 12 megapixel full frame sensor, 4K 120 video, 10-bit 422 internal. And that's one of the things where Sony has really struggled, is getting that 10-bit internal. But it looks like they've nailed it with the Sony A7S III. You'll have amazing autofocus, which coming from the GH5, that would be a nice feature to have. And then you have a 5-axis steady shot image stabilization, as well as a whole host of other things that make this Sony A7S III actually makes it look amazing. Now we know that the GH5 has been shooting 10-bit 422 internal for 3 or 4 years now, but Sony has nailed this on the A7S III with a full frame sensor and amazing autofocus, along with the 4K 120, which is a feature that I've kind of been wanting for a while, is 4K 120. I overuse 120 and I use a lot of 120 for B-roll, especially in my manufacturing videos. So having the capabilities of having 120 and 4K, which you can zoom in and zoom out with that slow motion, that really intrigues me. And now I almost think that this camera, the Sony A7S III, is geared towards video shooters, which the Canon R5 should have been. For a hybrid shooter like myself, the Sony A7S III checks off a lot of those boxes of the features that I'm looking for in a camera. And from what I've seen, the Sony A7S III doesn't seem to have any overheating issues, which coming from the GH5, I could just leave the GH5 on and let it roll and it'd be totally fine as long as I can keep the battery fresh. But the Sony A7S III doesn't seem to have any overheating issues like the Canon R5. And for videographers doing events, that is huge. So who is the Sony A7S III for? Well, I think it's for the hybrid shooter like myself. I think it's for the content creator, the vlogger who needs autofocus, who wants to shoot some awesome B-roll in slow motion. I think the Sony A7S III is for video creators. I think the Canon R5 and the R6, I think those cameras are more for photographers. And I hate saying that because the video features of the R5 and R6 are outstanding, but there's just little things here and there that I don't think video creators can rely on. So I will say this: Panasonic, Lumix, the ball is in your court. I'm hoping that you make a statement with the GH6 if you decide to release a GH6. And I understand it's not gonna be full frame, and full frame is all the rage right now. If I was a photographer, I would use full frame cameras. But I'm not a photographer. I love the versatility of the Micro Four Thirds sensor, but Panasonic, the ball is in your court. You need to make a statement with the GH6. All right, so ultimately what it comes down to is your needs as a video creator. If you need 8K video to punch in and punch out and you're not worried about overheating issues, if you're not doing a bunch of events, then the Canon R5 and R6 might be the best for you. If you're a hybrid shooter and you want some outstanding video specs, outstanding autofocus, 4K 120, then the next step might be the Sony A7S III. Coming from the GH5, I'm very impressed with these cameras and some of the specs on paper and some of the videos that I've been seeing, some of the reviews, some of the actual footage, I've been very impressed with. And with either one of these cameras, like the Canon R5, R6, and the Sony A7S III, I don't think you can go wrong. But another thing is you can't go wrong with sticking with the GH5. The GH5 has been an awesome camera for about 3 to 4 years, and ultimately I don't see it going away anytime soon. So I guess personally, one of the things that I need to evaluate and one of the things I need to think through is, one of these cameras right for me? The way that I shoot, the way that I edit, the way that I put together client work and my own content, and as a creator, what do I need in a camera? So I guess ultimately the camera that I'm gonna go with is